Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience. However, due to privacy rights, we have chosen not to display the number or list of attendees to everyone on the call today. And as a reminder, today's call is being recorded. We will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's presentation. However, you can submit a question at any time during the presentation by simply typing your question into the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Just type your question into the text field and click Send. Please keep the Send to defaulted to all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to turn the call over to your very first speaker and moderator for today's event. She is with Alteryx Alliance's team, Ms. Raman Kaler. Ms. Kaler, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for joining us today for our presentation, Alteryx plus Tableau, a winning combination. As Gerald just shared, I'm Raman Kaler with the Alteryx Alliance's team, and today I have the honor of being joined by our great partners over at Technion Data Solutions. Over the next hour, I'll be providing some information on our guest speakers, as well as the power of Alteryx plus Tableau. From there, I'll turn it over to the Technion team to provide a deep dive demo that will highlight the various integrations between the two platforms, as well as highlight how they truly complement one another to drive value for end users. And finally, we will wrap up with Q&A. With that, let's jump into a bit on Technion. Technion Data Solutions is a technology consulting firm specializing in business intelligence, data management, and advanced analytics. Their deep product know-how covers Alteryx and Tableau, as well as a number of other ecosystem partners, including Snowflake and DataRobot. A partner since 2014, Technion is an Alteryx Premier Partner and was selected as the Alteryx Partner of the Year for North America in 2017. Specifically, we will be joined by Joshua Milligan and Deanna Sanchez of Technion. Joshua is a 4-time Tableau Zen Master, 2017 Iron Viz finalist, and author of Learning Tableau. His passion lies in training, mentoring, and helping others gain insights and make database decisions. He is a principal consultant at Technion, where he has served clients in numerous industries since 2004. As for Deanna, she just doesn't do one thing well. She has mastered how to do things, all things well, and perfect them time and time again. In addition to being an Alteryx ACE and a senior consultant at Technion, Deanna is a DFW Women of Analytics Group founder, Alteryx User Group lead and training instructor, GIS software expert, and all-around analytics whiz. And at this point, I'd like to switch over to the reality of data and analytics in most companies today. As you can see from the figures here, big challenges exist with people, process, and technology when it comes to analytics. Lines of business are struggling to find and manipulate data so that it can be visualized. IT, on the other hand, is struggling with the variety and volume of data, as well as how to securely govern its usage. And data scientists are struggling to get their analytic models into production. The state of analytics is further complicated by legacy tools that only exacerbate these problems and reinforce the silos that exist between IT, analysts, and data scientists. Holding on to these relics are the biggest barriers to analytic alignment and innovation today. Alteryx takes a different approach to analytics. Our platform provides an end-to-end unified analytics experience that empowers all data workers to quickly and easily move back and forth between analytic tasks. From discovering the right data assets and collaborating with fellow analysts across the organization in a governed way, to connecting, prepping, and blending all of your data, no matter how big or varied. With Alteryx, you can then quickly move into developing advanced analytic models in a code-free and code-friendly environment, while leveraging visualytics to see how your data changes across your entire workflow. And once models are created, we help deploy them into production in real time and monitor and manage them, while eliminating month-plus long deployment cycles. Best of all, Alteryx brings centralized data, analytic assets, and users together in order to unlock true value and create a data science and analytics culture at scale. But don't just take my word for it. Earlier this year, we were listed as the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for data science and machine learning platforms. We are also the Gold Award winner of the 2017 Gartner Peer Insights Customer Choice Awards in BI and analytic platforms. As if that alone weren't enough, when deployed with Tableau, the solution of Alteryx plus Tableau delivers even more for the end user through the power of self-service data science and analytics with the beauty and functionality of Tableau visualizations. And that's exactly what you will see as I hand it over to Deanna and Joshua. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Deanna. Deanna?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Raman. I appreciate the great introduction. And thank you all for having me here today. It's a real privilege to be here and to be able to show you a little bit about Alteryx, actually. So I'm going to go straight into Alteryx Designer. And I'm going to show you today two different demos. We're going to start with a demo about spatial and demographic data, but I wanted to back up and say that Alteryx is really known as a data prep tool in many, many ways. But data prep is really just a cornerstone of the foundation of what all of Alteryx is. There's a wealth of information and applications that Alteryx can perform. There's actually quite a bit of tools here, as you can see as I'm scrolling through the tool sets at the top of Alteryx. We not only have those wonderful data preparation tools and join tools where you can join and union and even do very deep fuzzy matching and parse tools, but you can also perform applications inside in database tools, where you actually perform the formulas and filters and joins in the database. Without having to stream the data out and then join, you're actually doing all of those functions inside the database. They also have a wealth of reporting tools, so you can actually burst reports through an organization, outputting PDF, HTML, and many other formats. And then there's also the interface tools where you can design analytic apps for yourself and for others and share them on the gallery on your server. But today, I'm going to actually go into the spatial tools. So as Raman mentioned, my background is in GIS. My degree is in geography and GIS, and I've been performing spatial and demographic analytics for about 20 years. So as I like to say, started when I was 5, but that's not true. But I definitely want to show you these very cool spatial tools and what you can do with them, and then how you output that shapefile, and then Josh will take over and show how that shapefile is actually imported into Tableau and what you can do with it from there. So I'm going to start over in the Favorites tools. You can see these are the tools most widely used around the world by people who use Alteryx. And I'm going to pull in an Input Data tool. So with Alteryx, you can connect not just to a file, but to SQL Server, Oracle, Hadoop. You can even connect to other databases with ODBC and OLEDB connections, even Esri geodatabases for all you geo geeks out there, and I am one as well. So definitely wanted to highlight that. But when you can connect to a file, there's lots of options here. So I'm going to click on All Data Files, and you can see the wealth of connections available for the types of data you can input in Alteryx. And in fact, you can output almost every single one of these as well, and you can output a Tableau.tde or a Tableau hyperfile, and you'll see that later as I perform the demos as well. But for now, I'm actually going to just click on a file here, storeswithcity.shp, which stands for a shapefile. So you can see here it's a really simple file. I've got 10 different stores with store number, the cities that they're in, and then the spatial object, which is a point. So Alteryx is able to hold spatial object fields, such as in shapefiles. They can also hold map info tab files as well. And the Alteryx YXDB also is capable of holding that spatial object field. So the spatial object is either a geocoded point, holding a latitude and longitude, and some other additional data such as the boundary and the projection data. It can also hold and polyline and polygon data as well. So I'm going to add what's called a browse tool. And I love the browse tools in Alteryx because you can actually browse into your data and actually see what's happening with your data without having to create output. So I don't have to create some sort of file and then load it somewhere and look at it to see what my output is. I can just add a browse tool. And if you're using spatial data such as a shapefile or a mapinfo tab file or an Alteryx YXDB, you can actually add a browse tool and you get a nice map that comes along with that. You also get to see your points here. You can see my spatial object points. These are the store points. And so I always like to just add a browse whenever I'm doing spatial data, just to visualize it and make sure the data looks exactly like I want to. Another best practice when you're working with spatial data is to add a select tool and rename your data for the spatial object. This is going to be important, as you'll see in just a little bit later on, because I'm going to add some customer data here as well. So adding this store and customer data, this could also be applied to not only retail or restaurants where you're looking at stores and customers, but it could be, for example, hospitals, and they want to know where their patients are located, or they want to know where their urgent care centers are located. It can also be for logistics and distribution, for example. You could have stores and distribution centers, or distribution centers and warehouses. So each of these types of tools that we're going to use in spatial can be applied to all of those scenarios and much, much more. So I'm only hitting the tip of the iceberg here. As you can see with your select tool, there's something really wonderful about it, actually quite a few things. You not only see your fields coming in, but you can actually change your data type right there in the select tool. I can switch from a V string to a VW or variable width string. I can change all sorts of parameters. I can change the size, and I can even rename. This is one of my favorite parts about Alteryx. I can just click here and rename. So I'm going to call this store spatial object. Just so I know as it's coming down the stream, this is my store spatial object. And that way I'll make sure I know the difference between that and the customer spatial objects that I'll be adding. So I'm going to go back to my spatial tool set and I'm going to add a trade area. So the trade area tool is really nice in Alteryx. It can create not only a radius in miles or kilometers, but you can do a drive time minutes. So I'm actually going to change my radius here to 10. And I'm going to add a browse tool because with spatial data, you get a nice little map with it. It's going to add that, and you can see how fast that ran. That was less than a second, I think. And you can see in my browse tool, now I have a 10-mile radius around each of my stores. And these are overlapping, but you also have an option here of non-overlapping, so you can eliminate the overlap if needed. I'm actually going to change it to drive time minutes. And with Alteryx, with the spatial data bundle, you receive TomTom data. So TomTom data runs behind the scenes to create those drive time minute boundaries. And you receive either off-peak, night, or peak, which is rush hour traffic. So I'm going to leave it as off-peak. But I wanted to mention that night is very useful for those companies that have logistics and distribution, say with trucking. So if you want all of your trucks to run at night, you can actually calculate your drive time minutes using that night setting. So I'm going to go ahead and run this again now that I've switched it to drive time. And again, that's extremely fast. Alteryx runs in virtual memory, which I think is genius. And so it's blazingly fast. You can actually geocode quite a lot of records, really in just a few minutes, depending on your data set, or even just a couple of hours for very large data sets. So you can see here I've got my drive time minutes. So now that I look here and scroll in and see my drive time boundary, this is theoretically the edge of the boundary, denotes how long it would take to get from the store center to the edge of the boundary in 10 minutes. Again, for those of you who are in the Denver area, this is using off-peak data, so this is a Saturday or Sunday afternoon drive time there. So now that I've added my radius, I want to add in some customer data. So I'm going to go back, click on File, and I just want to add a CSV. So as I showed you before, I can add all sorts of data types. And I can actually have them all in one workflow. So I can have shapefiles, CSVs, I can even connect to a database and have that as an input into the workflow as well, all at the same time, which is one of the beautiful things about Alteryx. So you can see here I've got a customer ID, a store number, a segment, and then I've got a responder. And this is, for example, they responded to, say, a marketing campaign or a mail out. Got their address, city, state, and zip. These 4 fields are going to be very important when I geocode. So when you geocode, you need these 4 items all in separate fields. If you don't have them in separate fields, though, don't give up, there's hope. You can go to your address toolset, and there's a Parse Address tool. So you can actually parse that single field if your data is in a single field, and parse it into the different components needed. The cool thing also about Alteryx, and I'm going to say that really often because there's so many cool things about Alteryx, is the CAS tool, or the Coding Accuracy Support System. This actually cleans and standardizes your addresses. This is based on data from the U.S. Postal Service, and Alteryx updates it every 2 months. So if you're working in some high growth areas and you want the latest and greatest addresses and make sure that your addresses are cleaned and matching those U.S. Postal Service addresses, CAS is the way to go. And again, Alteryx updates that every 2 months. That's a really great frequency. And with CAS, I can actually clean my addresses and then use a geocoder. So geocoding is exactly what it sounds like. It's geocoding, or adding a latitude and longitude code to a point on the Earth's surface. If you'd like to know more about geocoding, I actually did a webinar at Technion, and I'm going to just show you the link here. I've had this in here. So if you want to know more about geocoding and all the details about all the codes that come out of it, you can just go to our Technion website at technionusa.com/video, and then look for the one called Geocoding in Alteryx, and it's called Finding the Right Place. So I did an hour-long webinar, and it talks all about geocoding and really gets deep into it. But today I'm going to use the US Geocoder. And the reason I love this little macro is it has all of the geocoding options wrapped into it. So I've got TomTom as my geocoder. I'm going to say first to all because I have about 3,000 records and I don't want to hand or manually multiple match those. So for example, if there's a 100 East Hickory Street and a 100 West Hickory Street, if I didn't specify it in my data, it's going to pop up and ask me which one do I want. Right now I'm going to default it to first to all. I'm also going to say yes to the CAS coding. This is going to use that CAS tool, but inside of this macro, and it's going to clean and standardize my addresses. I'm also going to say use the zip9 geocoder for failed records. So if it can't find it along a street or so on, it's going to look for that zip code and put it down to the zip9 level. So when you see that zip code and that dash and 4 digits, that zip9 actually denotes 8 to 12 households. So you can get to a really tight geocoding location by using zip9 if it doesn't find the address or the city or state, for example. So I'm going to also switch to input. So you can see here why the geocoder needs it in 4 separate fields. Definitely have each of these parsed out and ready to go. I'm then going to add all browsers. So to do that, I right-clicked on the tool as a little shortcut. I'm going to do that again and add all browsers. If you like hotkeys, you can do Control-Shift-B. And I'm going to run this very quickly. So again, you can see how fast this is running. It's going to geocode about 2,600 records in 4 seconds. That's extremely fast. And you can see here in my results window, I can see this summary or S output and see how many actually geocoded. So I got about 2,600 geocoded to the street level, which is very good accuracy. I'm going to open this window here. It extrapolated 1. It was outside of the street boundary, so it put it to the nearest street number. And then 10 of them geocoded to the zip9 level. So that's a good way for me to go back and say, oh, what happened with those addresses? I need to research those further. Here you can see the geocoded output. Got my original input here, and then it's going to add the CAS information. Most of the time this is going to match what you have as an input, but it will tell you if there's an error code, for example, if something happened with the data, and it will actually use this CAS data for the latitude and longitude generation. So again, if you want to know more about CAS and geocoding, you can actually learn more about it through the webinar that I showed in that little Explorer box there. Now that I've geocoded everything, I'm going to actually add a select tool here after geocoding. And again, I want to rename my spatial object. I'm also going to deselect almost everything from that CAS data and only select what I want to come down the stream. So I'll show you a little trick. If you hold down the Shift key, if you click on one and then Shift and hold down the rest, and then Options, you can select and select highlighted fields. And then you have only what you like in there. I'm also going to make sure and get my spatial object so I can perform spatial functions. I'm going to call this Customer Spatial Object. That way I have these two separate from each other. So now I've got a store spatial object and a trade area and a customer spatial object. I'm going to go back to my spatial tools and I'm going to do a spatial match. So Alteryx truly sees the data as separate layers coming in. Just like other GIS systems like Esri and MapInfo, you can actually take your layers and match them one on top of the other. So I'm going to actually match from my trade area here, and I'm going to take that as the target, and then use for universe, and I'm going to bring the customers in from the universe side. So I'm basically going to say what customers fit into the target of the trade area. So we have these trade areas here. I want to see what customers, when you look at your map, actually fit inside of those trade areas and spatially match on top of them. So I want to expand this just a little bit to see my data. And I want to switch the object field to trade area. We don't really want to see what customers matching to the store point. We want to see what customers go into the trade area. And again, this is one of the great reasons of renaming your spatial objects as you're creating your data. Now I have my customer spatial object, and I can say where the target intersects the universe. There's lots of other options you can do within or touching or intersecting. And for those wonderful geo geeks out there like me, you also have that custom DE9IM relation, which is the dimensionally extended 9 intersection model. So yes, Alteryx has that as well. So I'm going to just say where target intersects universe. And then I'm going to add a browse tool after my match. So M is for match, U is for unmatched. I'm going to run this again very quickly, just in the interest of time here. And you'll see that 1,786 matched. And if I do my browse, I can actually zoom in and I can see which customers are matching into which store trade area. So if I actually click on the trade area, in fact, I'm just going to use my select tool here in the map. I'm going to select these customers. It's going to say, okay, all of these customers here actually match within. I want to make sure and get it right here where I can look at this one trade area. So it's going to say these trade areas here. And if I look at my results window, it's got my store number and it's got all of my data. I can actually open the window of selected records and see each of those records that are in each of those radii for the store and the customer number that's inside each one of these. So it's really beneficial. You can actually physically do that spatial match one on top of the other in Alteryx. So I've got it matched spatially, but I may want to ask, okay, what about distance? I may want to say, okay, what's the distance from the store to the customer? We actually have a distance tool for that. So once you've got your store spatial object in line on the same row as your customer spatial object, this is a one-to-one relation. The store and the customer are all in the same row. You can use the distance tool. So I'm going to bring in the distance tool here. I'm going to pull from my matched output. And I'm going to say, what's the distance from the customer to the store? And the really neat thing about the distance tool is I can not only output straight line distance, but I can output drive time distance. So I'm actually going to say, okay, what's the drive time? I'm going to leave it at 30 minutes here. I'm going to allow reverse routing for optimum speed. I'm going to keep it at off-peak, and I want to output the cardinal direction as well. So I'm going to add a browse tool after that. Again, you can either bring a browse tool over, or you can right-click and add a browse tool, or Control-Shift-B. And as that runs, again, this is so fast. I'm not only geocoding, making drive time trade areas, matching spatially, but I'm also calculating distance as well in just a few seconds. You can see in my results window, now I have distance. So I have not only the straight line distance miles, the direction, and the drive time it takes to get there in minutes, but I have how many miles they're actually driving. So let's see, I'm going to take a look at one of these. Let's look at number 2 here. And I'm going to actually turn off the trade area in my map. And I'm going to say, let's see, zoom to selection. So you can see here, hopefully it shows up pretty well, there's a store here, and there's a customer here. All of these purple dots are customers. This pink one is the store in this shopping area. And then you have this customer over here. So they are, according to the scale bar here, about 2 miles. The store is 2 miles east of the customer directly, but it takes about 10 minutes to drive there. So they must come out of their neighborhood, get on the highway, come around, and then get up to the store in the shopping center. It takes about 10 minutes. They're actually driving about 2.6 miles when they do that. So this is really good data to have, especially if you're planning, say, how long do your customers or have to drive to the store, or how long does it take your patients to drive to the hospital? Do you want to optimize that or maybe add another location for your patients to get to if they're driving a long way? So we've got our distance, and maybe we want to do something else. We want to find the nearest. So I'm actually going to do a find nearest. And this tool's really neat. It actually does quite a lot of cool things here. So I'm going to say find my nearest customer to the store. So I'm actually going to say my store is the target. And then we're going to take the customers and actually make those the universe here. So again, universe is usually the larger data set, and then target is usually the smaller data set. So, and now I'm going to say, let's see, we'll keep spatial object here, customer spatial object there. I want to make the maximum distance 30 miles that it searches for the nearest. And then I'm actually going to add, just for the first nearest, what's my nearest one to each store? I'm going to run that. And then you'll see an output here. And it's going to have the one nearest for each store. And we actually have 10 stores, so you can see there are some duplicates here. So here's the store, and here's the nearest customer. And this is a good use. They're associated with this 105 store, but they're actually closer to store 100. So it may be good to ask some questions about why they're bypassing that store. There's 3 here. The reason there's 3 is that in this location, there's actually 3 customers that are located right on top of each other. So that's why it's finding the 3 nearest. The rest are finding the nearest here. So I did a find nearest of just the first nearest, but the neat thing is I can do 3 nearest, 20 nearest, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and add 3, and we'll see what happens after that. So if you get add 3, I'm going to open up my browse window, and you can see for every store, here's the 3 nearest customers, and then their rank, distance in miles, and the direction. So again, a lot of cool things you can do spatially. I'll show you one more spatial thing, and then we'll switch over to something really neat, the demographic data. So you can actually do spatial processing. So you can actually bring in a spatial process tool. And in Alteryx, you have options here. You can combine objects, cut the first from the second, or vice versa. You can even make an intersection object, and you can create an inverse intersection object. So I wanted to quickly just show you that, just what's available in that. But another really neat thing is that you can actually pull in demographic data. So Alteryx has demographic data sets from Experian, and you can actually do a wealth of calculations and analyses using this demographic data. Just really quickly what we can do with the allocate append. And I'm going to actually append data from the trade areas. So I want to just take demographic data and pull it within the trade areas. And this I'll actually pass over to Joshua as well. So I've got some custom geographies. I want to append the data into the store trade area. And for the demographic data, you can see there's a lot of variables here, over 1,600 in the Experian data set. Right now we'll go to basic variables, current year estimates. We're going to go into by percent. So I'm going to add some data, and then we'll see what Josh can do with that with his vizzes in Tableau. So we'll do educational attainment by sex, and then total. You can see the attainment brackets there. And then for the rest of that, I'll actually go into race and ethnicity, and then we'll go into households, and then total. So we want all the races by percent there. I'm actually going to go into income, and go into household income. You can see the cohorts there, and I'll choose median household income for the income. And then I also want to add just the basics of total family, household, and population. You can see here we also have consumer expenditure data. So you can actually get into average expenditures on education, entertainment, and so on. These are all consumer data here for the consumer expenditure. You have business summary data for all your workplaces and businesses. And then you also have the mosaic, which is the segmentation distributions. We won't go into that today, but we definitely have other webinars on that available through Technion. I do want to go into housing units. So you can actually get housing units, current year, and then I think I'll go into housing value. I'll do the median housing value within those trade areas. And then, in addition to housing units, I want to go into my Simmons product profiles. So we do have Simmons survey data, and I'm going to scroll down and go into travel. I've been traveling a lot lately, so I actually recently saw at an airport that the #1 destination right now is to France. So I'm going to do any trip, Europe and France. And I also want to know who's currently enrolled in a frequent flyer program. So again, you've got a wealth of data here that you can do with all these variables. So with the variables, I'm actually going to add a browse real quick and show what that looks like as I run it. So we've got the variables running, and it's going to output the data. And you can see quickly here, I've got my trade area information, and then all of my variables come out, but they are in these cryptic headers that Experian provides, just to have those short names for the variables that come through. To remedy that, I can actually go to demographic analysis, allocate meta info. So I'm going to add the meta info or layman's terms to the data. And I'm going to go to my developer tools and do a dynamic rename. So dynamic rename is really useful, especially in this case. I'm going to connect the meta info, and I'm going to change my dynamic rename here. And I'm going to say, instead of rename with a formula, I'm going to say take field names from right input rows. I'm going to say ignore, because I don't want to hear if there's any warnings on that for this one. And I'm going to say replace the name, which was that cryptic header there, with the description. And then I'm going to add a browse, and now you should see layman's terms there. I also want to make sure I did the right vintage, Experian US vintage there. Because we do have other vintages available, so I want to make sure in the drop-down, choose the right one. And I'm going to output two data outputs here. With the first one, I'm going to actually go back and output my trade areas in a shapefile. And then I'm going to output this data as well as a shapefile. And now you can see our headers. You can actually see for each of these 10 trade areas, you can see who has a master's degree and so on, total families, and who's interested in a trip to France and who's enrolled in their frequent flyer program, even their median housing value. So for outputs, so again, a wealth of options here for your outputs. I'm actually going to take my output here straight from my distance, and I'm going to save that as a file. And I'm going to just call it, let's see, instead of hyper, I'm going to make it an Esri shapefile. And I'm going to call this store trade areas. And leave it as a shape. And we'll save. And yes, I want to replace that. You can tell I've made one before. And then I'm also going to add an output data down here. And I'm going to produce this output and send it over to Josh for visualization in Tableau. And I'm going to make this one a shapefile as well. But again, you've got all these options, including tableau.tde for data extract and your hyper. I'll actually be showing that in the next demo. So this is store trade area demographics. And we'll just keep that as a shapefile. And then I'll run that as well. So you can actually see how quickly it runs. And now that I've output this data, I'm going to pass it over to Josh. So we've actually combined spatial and demographics into this one workflow. And I'll send it over to you, Josh, for your visualization.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dana.
And let's see, I'll pass the ball to you really quickly here.
All right, so with that data, I am going to use Tableau and connect to those shape files that Deanna has created. You can see that Tableau makes it very easy to connect to shape files and to even do some interesting things with them. So I have the store trade area demographics shape file. I also have the customer and store points as a shape file. And so having those two together, I can actually join them. Now I think I could join them on probably the store ID, but Tableau also allows me to do some intersection with the spatial objects. So I'll just keep this here where it's joining based on the trade area and the customer points. And with that data, now I can start to visualize it and start to analyze it even further. I might want to do just some ad hoc analysis because, as I noticed, Deanna included a lot of rich demographic data here. Now, the spatial objects are really nice in Tableau because a double click automatically visualizes anything such as a polygon or a shape. The points would be fine as well. I am going to make sure that I bring in the store ID so that I get a separate trade area for each store. And then I can start to look at some of these demographic information, such as the total population, and I can start to see the population numbers of each trade area fairly easily. I might be interested in that median household income. And I'm starting to gain some insight here. It's actually very interesting to me that my two trade areas, my two highest median household income, are the very far extremes, north and south. And then as I get closer to the city center, that median household income declines. So I'm starting to gain some insight into the data. I was very curious to look at the frequent flyers, how many there, and very interesting. I have a trade area here for store 100 that has quite a few frequent flyers. I might also be interested in looking at the customers themselves. So again, Deanna created points for each of those customers and the stores. So I am able to bring those in, and I'll bring in the customer ID to make sure we've separated each one. But I could start to look at these in different ways as well. I might switch to a shape and then look at it sized by the drive time, for example, and see which customers have the highest drive times or the lowest drive times. I could do the same thing with the distance themselves. So this is really neat that we were able to bring in that data from Alteryx and be able to see it very easily. Tableau has recently introduced a visualization type of density, and so that can be very interesting to start to look at how dense those trade areas are and the customer locations. Where do they occur the most? And so I might take a look at that and just see where do I have hotspots of customer activity. And in fact, with a little bit more effort, I might start to build out something a little bit more polished, where I start to bring that together with the stores and start to see, where do I have customer concentrations around each store, or where do I potentially have stores that don't have a lot of customers concentrated around them. And then I can go even further. I might create an entire analytical tool for an end user, a dashboard or some other kind of utility to help people analyze their trade areas and their customers and their stores, to start to see, how many customers are in a given trade area, what are the demographics of that trade area, and then to start to zoom in on individual stores and start to see where are those stores located, where are the customers located in relation to that store. and so I can start to do those sorts of things. I can start to see how the shape of the data in terms of histograms might look for the drive distance and drive times, and how that changes from store to store, and then filter based on drive time. So if I want to know a specific range of drive time and see how many customers fall within that range and where they fall within that range, I can find that out fairly easily too. And so I can do all kinds of really cool things with that data, that very rich data set that Deanna created using Alteryx. And so I'm excited to turn it back over to her to see what she's able to create next.
See all the capabilities that are available in Tableau. So it's always exciting and wonderful to watch how you work your magic, actually. So thank you for showing what you can do just with that shape output that I made in Alteryx there. So again, Alteryx and Tableau work seamlessly together, especially when you provide output and push it over to Tableau, using it to do the spatial heavy analytics side on the back end in Alteryx, and then creating those beautiful vizzes in Tableau as well. So now I've got some predictive information I want to show you. There is a wealth of information here and a lot of tools available in your predictive tools with Alteryx. I won't go too deep into them for the interest of time, but I do have a workflow that I have built using forest models, decision trees, a logistic regression, a stepwise, and so on. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you the one that's actually already built, that I went ahead and built. You can see the date on there. So I will confess that was very recent where I was touching this one up. But I've got some data here. Target campaign model input. Again, customers with responses, just to see if they responded no or yes to a campaign. And we're going to look at that data. We're going to predict how likely they are to respond in the future, either no or yes to a future campaign. So in Alteryx, in your preparation tools, you have a Create Samples tool, and this time I just made an estimation sample of 50, validation of 50, and you can make a holdout if you want to. So you could do, for example, 80 for your estimation, 10% for your validation, then 10 for the holdover or holdout sample. But for this exercise, I just did 50 and 50. I've got a logistic model here, so I can do a logistic regression. My target variable is responder. Are they going to respond, yes or no? And here's some variables I chose that might influence whether or not they're going to respond. The years they're a customer, number of transactions, total spend, and the distance miles. How far away are they traveling to get to their store? So I can see in my logistic model here, there are three outputs. O is for the output or the model output. R is for the report, and I is for interactive. So you can get a report from your logistic regression, and if you like stats, you can go ahead and look at the data and see where the standard errors are and so on in your report. But Alteryx also has these interactive reports as well, so you can actually look at your logistic regression this way. And the real interactive one that is very cool is the decision tree, so I'll show you that in a moment. So you can actually see your summary here, your positives. You can hover and get some data with this. But in the interest of time, I'll show you what the stepwise looks like. So I can do a stepwise iteration. This is called step model. I can do backwards and forwards or backwards only. I can do my AIC or AKK information criterion or the Bayesian information criterion. And for my output, I can see here for my report, I can see my step model and what that report looks like. So I can see here that total spend has, a very strong influence here. There's a strong p-value there. My distance miles has a negative but very strong correlation as well. So something to keep in mind here. I'm doing a decision tree. I can set up my target variable as responder. Again, the same for predictor variables that I think are going to influence whether or not they're going to respond. I can get a decision tree report straight out of that. And you can see here my pruning table, my leaf summary. But instead of having to pore through this table and try to figure out where your nodes are for your decision tree, you can actually go into the interactive tool for the decision tree. So I'm going to say, show me the tree. And with the tree, I'm actually going to say, let's get into this part here. Here's my decision tree. Here are the nodes, and I can actually hover and see some of the influences on this. I'll make this a little bigger. So you can see what percentage is coming out of where the branches are coming off the nodes. And I can see that if spend is less than 235, then I have this information. It's going over here to a no, but if they spend more than 235, I have more of a yes. Here's that distance that was an influencing variable. If it's greater than 4, they tend to go this way, and if it's less than 4 miles, I have these nodes coming off of it as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. It actually gives you some of your criteria here. I also have a forest model that I've run. Pretty much the same setup. Choose my target variable, but I have a lot of options here for model customization if I want to, and change my parameters. I'm going to go into that forest tree and look at that summary as well for the report. I called that a forest tree, didn't I? Forest model. I'm thinking about trees here. And I can see my variable importance plot. Total spend and distance miles are some of the most important variables there. So I put this together and I unioned all 4 of my models using the O output, and I did a lift chart. Just did a lift chart to figure out, okay, which one on the gains table really might be the best model to use. Since I'm using a binary classification or a yes-no type of data set coming in, a lift chart will actually guide me and let me know really which one should I start to focus on and which one might be the best model here. From the gains table, looking at it, you really want to know which one gets you to 100 the fastest. So it looks like the forest model gets you to 100 the fastest. There are some other criteria, you need to look at your lift and things like that, but I won't go into that today. But since I saw that it got to 100 the fastest, I went ahead and pulled my score straight from the forest model. I connected my score not to the estimation sample that I trained the models on, but I connected it to the validation sample. So now we want to validate and score this model. There is an option for Alteryx Promote. Alteryx Promote is a really fascinating platform where you can actually promote your models and productionalize them throughout your organization. So it works off the Alteryx server. I highly recommend you go to alteryx.com and look at Alteryx Promote if you're interested in productionalizing all of your models. So now that I've added this score, I've got a score here of no and a score of yes for every single customer, for every single respondent, and I can predict who's going to be most likely to respond yes. I've used a sort tool. I've scored on yes and descending, so I can see who really are most likely at a level of 1 to respond. And I've added a formula tool. So in the formula tool in Alteryx, you have not just the basic formulas, but you have lots of formulas here. You even have finance with your CAGRs and your IRRs. You also have spatial tools as well, combining in those objects. Lots of string where you can get words and do string functions. And then you even have test for is empty and is null and so on. But with this formula, I already have one already put together here, and it's just called label. So I'm going to actually look at my label. If the score is higher than 0.75, call it high. I have one for medium, otherwise call everything else low. I've got now added this new criteria called label, and then I've outputted as customer responses with score.tde. You can actually output this as a hyper as well. So I actually did that a little earlier. Hyper. So with that, I'm going to pass the ball back over to Josh, and we'll see what he did in the visualization with this information. So that was a very quick overview of predictive, but we do have a lot more information that we can give you about predictive tools. And at Technion, we also have quite a lot of people at Technion, our consultants, that are trained in not only the predictive tools, but we also have a PhD who taught it at the professor level, Dr. Kyle Roberts. So Joshua, back over to you.
All right, thank you, Deanna. So Yeah, I was excited to collaborate with you on this, and one of the things that I wanted to understand right away from Deanna was the factors that the model identified as being keys in making the predictions. And that's important for me using Tableau because I want to understand how to communicate a visual data story or even a visual predictive story to tell people how these predictions were made and give them some confidence that the predictions are correct and give them some tools to use to then use those predictions to make decisions. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time myself trying to understand some of these factors. So looking at things like scatter plots, and here I can see the correlation of distance as it relates to the score that Alteryx provided, and I can bring in things like the label that Alteryx gave, so that I can see those that were highly predictive in terms of returning based on promotions, those who are in the medium range, and then those who are unlikely to. And I can see that, yeah, I've got some outliers, some people who do travel long distances and are predicted to return, but the lower the distance, definitely the higher the prediction overall. And I might look at some of the other factors like the total spend and notice that that's very similar, although the reverse, the higher the total spend, the more likely they are to return. And then after I have some confidence in the model and some understanding of how these decisions were made, then I want to communicate that to the end user and even give them a potential tool to use. So imagine that the store owner wants to understand, what people are likely to respond, and how do we leverage that information to target customers for a future promotion. I don't want to spend all kinds of money sending promotions to customers who aren't going to respond. So knowing my factors, now I want to understand how that relates. I see overall I've got about 47% of my customers fall in that high range of likely to respond. But I can also start to see things like the distance making an impact. And so as I start to select, I can see, okay, now 0 to 1 miles, it's 84%, and I can start to add in other distances to get to the number of customers that I want to target, but then also looking at that percentage, and then I can start to bring in other factors, so the total spend. And so I noticed now, if I were to send out promotions to this group of customers, I could expect close to 100% response, and I might add in more. And with that higher total spend, I realize I can add in higher distances, and it's not going to drop the percentage response that's expected all that much. And so once I've got a comfortable number of customers at a high percentage that I feel good about, now I can actually walk through my target list and see, here are some that are predicted at 100%, but it's going to drop down because there are some who have lower spend, higher miles, less transactions, and I could further narrow down this list if I wanted to start to understand and make decisions about who do I want to target with future promotions. So Deanna, thank you so much for that data set. That was a lot of fun and very, very nice to use in Tableau. I am going to turn it back over to Roman.
Thank you so much to both Deanna and Joshua. I know there was a ton of great content, and there's still so much more that we can cover. And in the interim, we had multiple questions come in, so we will answer as many as we can during the next few minutes, but rest assured that all the questions that did come in will be answered at least offline, so we will be getting back to you. In terms of next steps, I highly encourage you to visit alteryx.com/tckit, TC standing for Tableau Conference, and there you will get your 14-day free trial of Alteryx Designer, along with the Alteryx Analytic templates for Tableau. So these are workflows that were specifically designed for current Tableau users in mind, so that you can really see how the two platforms work together, and you can see how you can get more from your investment in Tableau using Alteryx. So I highly recommend that you go ahead and visit that URL. As for Q&A, we do have a number of questions. One question I saw come up in a number of times in various forms was regarding Tableau Prep as well as Alteryx Designer. So one question is, I recently got Tableau and learned Prep is a package deal, which I find to be a powerful tool. What are some major difference points between Alteryx and Tableau Prep? It seems to me Prep is a light data prep tool compared to Alteryx.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've actually been using Tableau Prep quite a bit. In fact, I worked with some of the developers even before it was released in production. It is a very different platform from Alteryx. So what I love about Alteryx is that it allows you to connect to any data, do any transformation, and output to any data source. Tableau Prep is much more designed to be within the Tableau ecosystem, so it is a little bit more lightweight. It is definitely a newer product, so not as fully featured. I do love the fact that it's very visual like Tableau, but it's definitely got a different feel to it, and it's a different audience that's targeted. So you'll definitely want to think through and understand those differences as you consider how does that fit within your work with data.
Awesome. And another question I have is, what types of advanced training is available for me to get more advanced at Alteryx? And I think this may be a great opportunity to share any information you have on how folks can get in touch with Technion itself.
Yes, I'd be very glad to answer that. We do actually provide a wealth of training in Alteryx from the beginner level all the way up through advanced training. So we have a 2-day beginner level training and then a 1-day advanced for analytic apps. So you get deeper into creating apps, and then a 1-day training on predictive analytics. So please contact us at technionusa.com. You can actually reach out to us and ask about the training there and look at our website. We do have a page where you can submit information and ask about training. We also not only come to but if you're in the Dallas area, you can come to our location and we train you there. And we also do virtual training. So we can train you by WebEx. Doesn't have to be a full day. We can do it just a couple hours at a time, actually. But we do have quite a lot of training available in Alteryx. And there's also training on the Alteryx website as well that I'd like to mention. So there's a lot of step-by-step and guide yourself training there. But if you would like in-person and more one-on-one or interactive training with a classroom, we definitely provide that through Technion.
Thank you, Deanna. And I know we've hit the top of the hour, but just given the number of questions, I'm hoping we can answer maybe 2 or 3 more. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be getting back to all of the folks that ask these great questions offline. The next question I have is, if I want to set up a manufacturing plant, is there a way to pinpoint the optimal site location that is within the shortest distance to all of my wholesale ease and suppliers?
Yes, I'd be glad to answer that one as well. Yes, you can absolutely do that in Alteryx. You may need some assistance with people who are skilled in site selection. Not only I at Technion, but others at Technion can assist with that. But I've actually used Alteryx for those exact same situations, and Alteryx runs beautifully. Again, runs in virtual memory, so you can process all that spatial data very quickly and use that to optimize your locations.
Fantastic. And here's a great question. With the power of Tableau and Alteryx, why is it important for me to, quote unquote, get my data right first if these tools can do so much?
That's a great question. So I think as I think through what it means to get your data right, there might be some different meanings there. one temptation is to think that I have to have all of my data exactly right in order to visualize it in Tableau or do analytics in Alteryx and explore it. That's not true. I mean, these tools are very powerful, and they are meant to help you explore your data and understand the gaps that are there and understand the problems that are there. So it's not that you have to have it right before you even start using the tools. But as you begin to use the tools, you do have to identify those gaps very quickly. What data is missing? What data is wrong? What data do I need to do the analysis that I want? And those are the kinds of questions that you need to be asking up front, because as powerful as these tools are, if you don't identify the issues with the data and start to address them, then you can do analysis that's completely wrong and make decisions that's based on incomplete or wrong data.
Thank you so much for that, Joshua. And just taking a look at the time now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to once again thank Deanna and Joshua and the entire Technion team for their support with this great presentation. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us involved. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.